Mr. Giovanni, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Tate, we've heard you speak about wanting more money from taxpayers. We've heard you talk about job cuts. I'd like to ask some questions about how your business, the CBC, is currently operating. And with the $1 billion of taxpayer subsidies you have, the CBC has to compete with the private sector, including in hiring talent. Is that correct?
No. We don't compete with the private sector. We live in an ecosystem with the private sector. We are complementary to the private sector.
Okay. That sounds like a fancy way of saying compete. So now, does that include having to hire broadcast executives and on-air talent in the marketplace or the ecosystem, as you referred it to?
For sure, there are situations where a on-air talent might go to CBC, as they often do to CTV or to TVA. It is an ecosystem. People move. We want to have those kinds of opportunities for all our journalists.
So to attract talent, would you have to pay market compensation to people you want to bring into the organization?
As I've said before, we aim for what we call P50, which is about 50% of market. So at no time are we trying to beat the market. We average the market.
Okay. Well, you make about $500,000, and plus you haven't ruled out bonuses, so maybe more than that. Would market rates mean that executive vice presidents may be on salary for over $1 million a year?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your logic here.
If you are competing in the ecosystem as you described it, are you having to pay potentially executive vice presidents $1 million a year?
I think the Député Champoux raised this question with me last appearance when we talked about the compensation at Bell and at other TVA and other media companies. We are not paying anywhere near, as I said, we stay to about 50% of market rates.
Gotcha. So could you confirm how many CBC employees may be earning in the range of your salary or higher?
I don't believe anybody at CBC Radio-Canada has a base salary higher than mine.
What about if you factored in bonuses? Would there be salaries that would be comparable to yours?
Yes, there would be at the executive vice president level.
Okay. So would there be any indicators in your business performance that would cause you to consider that you might be overpaying some of your employees based on the performance of the organization? Are there any indicators that would cause concern in your mind to overpayment for what the CBC is producing and what the outcomes are of the
Absolutely not. As I've said before, we do an annual review with the board of directors, with outside experts to check on that very question. We're constantly mapping salaries right through the unaffiliated groups to look at that they are, as I said, at a 50 percentile.
So just to confirm, as you're doing this mapping, there would be nothing that you could foresee that could make you pause and say, this would be a reason why we should not be paying bonuses or high salaries. There'd be no cause for concern that maybe people are being overcompensated with taxpayer dollars at the CBC?
I absolutely do not believe that people are overcompensated. If anything, we are not competitive in the market.
So to the Canadian people who pay all of these salaries and fund the organization, you'd like to say to them now, there's nothing that could come on your radar. There's no data point that could come across your desk that would make you pause and consider maybe we're paying too much, maybe the organization's not performing well enough, maybe we have to restructure how we're doing things, maybe we need a little bit of self-reflection on why the defund CBC movement is growing so exponentially.
As I said before, the reason the board of directors made the decision to do a compensation review was, in fact, to make sure that all the information that we've been working with is, in fact, 100% accurate, and perhaps we should be looking at all the other ways to approach compensation. So there's an openness to change and to review, absolutely.
But declining viewership wouldn't be one, declining revenue wouldn't be one, broad public distrust of your organization wouldn't be one. It seems to me that the average Canadian taxpayer, maybe it would be fair to ask, what would you need to see to consider that the CBC is heading in the wrong direction, and therefore asking for more money, as you have done today, seems not only out of touch, but rather audacious.
Let me be clear. Digital revenues have tripled. CBC Gem, which was launched at the beginning of my tenure, now reaches millions of Canadians. So I think, let's be clear, the facts
What about,
that you
is
are...
ad revenue, is ad revenue
Excuse me, I
down?
think the time is up. I'd like Ms. Tate to answer the question. Thank you.
Digital ad revenue and subscription revenue are both up. TV ad revenue, as per all media companies, is down or flat, depending on the market. It's actually down higher right now in Quebec than it is in the rest of the country. The country is suffering inflation, so sponsors and advertisers have withdrawn. But quite frankly, to say that viewership and ad revenue are down, and those are the determining features of this last 6 years, is simply inaccurate.
Thank you, Ms. Tate. Thank you. Look, for 5 minutes.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, Ms. Tate. Ms. Tate, do you acknowledge the fact that 90 years ago we did not have the Internet? We had an entirely different reality, so you keep referring to those 90 years, but that takes us outside the scope of the current debate. And on the other hand, you have parliamentarians who created the CBC in the first place. Do they not have the right to decide on its future? Well, parliamentarians who created the CBC 90 years ago, do they not have the right to decide on its future? But the question is simple, yes or no? It's not a simple question at all. It's very nuanced. Not really, Ms. Tate, because parliamentarians, and you referred to this yourself, you said that it was created by parliamentarians, so parliamentarians now are trying to be mindful about the taxpayers' money and how it's being spent. So for the 1,100 employees who shared $18 million in bonuses, do these employees also receive pay raises every single year? Just to clarify, Chair, it's not just full-time employees.
Ms. Tate, to answer your question, please. Thank you.
Alors, on parle des employés non syndiqués. Hein? Alors, très bien.
So, do these people receive pay raises every single year? Well, it depends. I think over the last 5 years, we had 1.5% increase. So half the raise that was received by our union employees. So it depends on the negotiations, and it also depends on their relationship with the employer because they negotiate separately. So non-union employees, they don't have the right to negotiate pay raises. So unilaterally, CBC decides on how much they will get in a raise. Well, it also depends on the Treasury Board. But so their salaries go up, and they also receive bonuses, which totaled $18 million, and these are exorbitant numbers. Well, on average, it amounts to $15,000 per employee, well, which is a significant percentage of their pay. So in addition to the raises, they receive these bonuses. Do you find this to be normal in a period where we are going through harsh, difficult economic times for CBC Radio-Canada, that the employees are receiving bonuses at this level in addition to pay raises? Well, Mr. Berthold, we are below the average in the industry. So if you have someone who makes $90,000, it means that that's less than someone else who works at a department or at a private company. So you're giving the impression that these are enormous salaries, but that is not the case. We are always trying to attract people to come and work for CBC Radio-Canada. how many employees make more than $200,000 per year? I don't have that off the top of my head. Well, can we get that information for 100 to 200, 200 to 300, 300 to 400 segments? Mr. J, I have another question. Now, CBC can do a whole series of things in terms of its programming. But here at the Conservative Party, we want to preserve Radio-Canada. And you referred to a document a couple minutes ago, and I think it's proof that CBC is failing, because when I look at the number of hours people spend watching TV, the number of hours people spend on the social platforms created by CBC, unfortunately, we see that it's a failure. And especially in Quebec, we need a strong public TV, public broadcaster. And I was looking at the average number of hours that are going down rather faster in English than in French. So Radio-Canada numbers are propping up CBC, if you will. And if we cut CBC, then we would be able to maintain the quality at Radio-Canada, because there are experts who would be able to protect Francophone culture, and I would like to underline their contribution, because Radio-Canada is really exemplary in terms of being a public broadcaster in our region. So isn't CBC bringing Radio-Canada down, if you will, because you're investing so much public money, public funds into CBC as opposed to Radio-Canada? Well, listen, as I've said many times, we are asking Canadians to support. Are we going to ask all Canadians to support an organization for only 20% of the population? Because we have 80% of the population who tune into the radio, 95,000 hours of local radio every year, and 45,000 hours of audiovisual production, TV production. So saying CBC is a failure, you seem to think that we can really go back in time to the era of Anglophone television. But in that market, it's not just CBC that has been losing viewership. People are migrating towards YouTube, other platforms, and we have been seeing this phenomenon since I assumed this role. We had a very limited audience on CBC Gem, but now we have 2 million people every week, so it is a real transformation. But that's out of 40 million Canadians.
Over time, it's really getting to be ridiculous. Come on, let's go now. So I'm going to go to...
She was answering, Ms.
I'm going to go to Ms. Gainey. I know. No, I'm not saying it. I'm just saying you guys. It's a generic term. It's a generic term, Mr. Berthold.